New time, same Oklahoma coverage here at the Voice of College Football. So, welcome into our 46th edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live here on a Wednesday. We appreciate everybody standing by, being patient, and rolling with the punches today. And appreciate everybody being here. So, leave those comments and questions in the live chat as always, and we will get to them as soon as possible. Talking OU football with spring football up ahead. Of course, we got Jason Ray on the line for last word on college football to help us sort it all out. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. How are you, sir?
I am doing well. I am doing well. So we will start with the most pressing news. Um, one of the few signees that are left on the board for the 2022 class, and that's Levias Overton, the fifth rated defensive lineman in the country, 18th rated player nationally out of Georgia, top three player in the state of the Peach State there. And what is the latest we're hearing on him and a possible package deal?
Yeah, so I think he's coming for an official visit to Oklahoma on the 5th of March, if I remember correctly. So yeah, and I think it's really a package deal with his brother Micaiah, who. So I think Mark it has been down to Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Oregon. It looks like Texas A&M doesn't really have the appetite for both to bring in Micaiah and Levias both. So I think Oklahoma and Oregon are probably the two biggest players here. So I think you look at the track record that, I mean, at least here through his career, and then even what he's been able to do here the short time. What Todd Bates has been able to do at Oklahoma, and then obviously previously at Clemson from a recruiting perspective. Given the fact that I think where Oklahoma has a chance for certainly the bias to be able to play early on. I think initially he was really, really high on Oklahoma's list. Obviously, his brother was a previous. I'm sorry, not his brother. His father was a previous player at Oklahoma back in the '90s. So I think you have that in your back pocket if you're Oklahoma, and I think it comes down to the culture. The culture change is really seemingly making a big impact. Not only with the kids that Oklahoma has on campus, but where Oklahoma has been able to make kind of a little bit of an uptick late there in the last part of the 2022 cycle. So it would be a huge get for Oklahoma to get both of those kids, but particularly Levias, who is as you mentioned, top 5 defensive lineman in the country, top 20 overall kid. Would be Oklahoma's only 5-star. How interesting, ironic would that be that it's the one that's well after signing day. I think Oklahoma's still on the Connerly kid, the offensive lineman out of Washington, but haven't heard a whole lot on that. And that one's probably gonna go a while too. So I wouldn't expect this one to wrap up anytime. Obviously, definitely not before spring ball with taking some of that visit early on in March, but something that Oklahoma fans will obviously keep an eye on, and probably um, the biggest fish left, I guess, in the 2022 cycle. You never know about some transfer portal guys who may decide, even after spring ball, decide that hey, I want to move on, but and see what that looks like. But I think right now, these two kids are where Oklahoma coaching staff, from a recruiting perspective, here in 2022 are focused on.
We are talking about the 8th rated player in the country when we talk about Josh Connerly, who's still looking to make a decision. Then, as we mentioned, with Overton, he is in the 247 Sports Composite number 17 overall. And then you pretty much go through the rest of the top 100. I did this a couple weeks ago. I couldn't find anybody else in the top. I'm sifting through the top 100 players in the country and even beyond that. And we're talking about the two heaviest hitters on the board by far. And we're talking about nobody else in sight that has not signed. So we are talking about the very last stragglers of the 2022 class as I'm going now 250 players deep, and they're the only two on the board that have yet to sign. So if Oklahoma could nab one of those two, and Levias would be the most obvious one that's leaning in that direction, that's an enormous icing on the cake component to the 22 class.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely will. And I was just kind of looking back a little bit on this recruiting for Levias. He's actually visited he's visited Oklahoma 3 times already. This will be the fourth. This will be the first under the Venables regime. He's visited A&M quite a few times. This will be the first, and both the kids are actually taking their visits obviously together to these schools. But this will be the first visit that he has to Oregon. So I think these visits will probably span the month of at least the first part of March. So yeah, no, it's exciting, especially who Oklahoma has been able to get through not only the 2022 cycle but the transfer portal. One of the biggest concerns I think for Oklahoma fans was among the defensive line. I think at least before Venables and his crew kind of came in, right? That based on who they were losing. So I think they feel good about where they're at, and this would just obviously be kind of the the tip of the cap here.
Jason, everybody missed you last week. And we see the comments coming in. Glad Jason is back. Jason's back. Cool. They had to put up with me for a solid hour last week. So that was obviously not the best viewing experience for our Oklahoma fans. So they put up with me for an hour last week. We got Jason back. Everybody just keep the notifications on, and we will get back to everyone in terms of trying to figure out a permanent time slot going forward. So just bear with us. And we've been rolling through for 46 consecutive weeks, mostly on Wednesdays around the lunch hour. And we will just need to make an adjustment to that, and we'll figure it out and go on from there. So appreciate everybody being here. We wanted to start to attack spring position previews. And Andrew, I'm glad that you still love us. Appreciate that. Of course, spring practice, we're still looking to nail down dates in regards to the start of spring practice. But we'd like to start with the quarterback position. And again, leave your comments and your questions regarding anything involved with Oklahoma football in the Big 12. But of course, the big splash is Dillon Gabriel taking over for Caleb Williams as the starter, through 70 touchdown passes with only 14 picks, over 8,000 yards as a starter at UCF. We've talked about the more quality defenses that he will face on a regular basis. I don't think it's a huge, enormous gap, but it is measurable, decided that he's going to face more future NFL players on a regular basis as the starting quarterback at Oklahoma than what he faced in the American Conference. And a guy that moves around, runs well, and was banged up and knocked out after 3 games this past season. So the lefty will be in play starting in September, Jason.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. One of the things that Riley did over his regime, he was very hesitant to name starting quarterbacks early on, specifically in spring when we knew obviously the guy was Baker. We knew obviously the guy was Kyler Murray. We knew obviously the guy was Jalen Hurts. He kind of played that out. It's a different story. Different story here. Jeff Levy already came out and said there's no quarterback competition. There's Dillon Gabriel's our guy. He's going to be our guy, and I think it's not too dissimilar than what Oklahoma has had in the past in terms of Oklahoma just really doesn't have anyone that has any experience in a game type situation other than Dillon Gabriel. So it's obviously a little bit of a no brainer. But I think the fact that Jeff Levy went ahead and did that, I think it made some waves with Oklahoma people just from the aspect that it's not ever been done before. So, but I think when you come into this season, Mark, you look at the quarterback room and you lose a couple of kids like a Spencer Rattler, like a Caleb Williams, and I think you automatically look at that and like, okay, we're gonna have you're gonna have a big downward trajectory. And so I don't obviously that's not necessarily the case when you bring in someone with the experience and with the numbers that you'd mentioned: 70 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, over 8,000 yards passing in his career, like Dylan Gabriel had. I think coming in, he's a guy that probably doesn't move as well as Caleb Williams, but probably moves better than Spencer Rattler in the pocket. Has a really, really good deep ball. I think that's something that Oklahoma fans and people that watch this team are going to see. That's a bit of an improvement with what Oklahoma had with Rattler and even Caleb Williams, to an extent of being able to complete maybe a higher percentage of those deep balls. I think the two concerns, one that you mentioned, I think coming in, how does a kid like Dylan Gabriel do against better quality defenses week in and week out, as opposed to what he faced in the American Conference? And I think the second one is just completion percentage. I think he was much better in those 3 games before he got injured. To your point, Mark, closer to 68% completion percentage for his career. He's right around 60. I think most people would like that to be probably in the mid 60s, somewhere around there um, for Oklahoma's offense. So I think that would be the only concern coming in, looking at Gabriel. But no, he's going to be the guy. I think what gives him an advantage, Mark, we've talked about this on several occasions, but the fact that he knows the offense really well, playing under Levy's system at UCF, and then bringing that to Oklahoma, being able to come in the spring and help with that implementation of that offense will be really encouraging for just for the trajectory of how good this offense could be.
Pro Football Focus ranks Dylan Gabriel as the 8th best quarterback in the country coming back for 2022. That's where they have him ranked. I'm trying to compare him to other quarterbacks. Trying to find the list here. Bryce Young's number 1, CJ Stroud's number 4. I don't know why I can't just find a list, but Spencer Rattler's actually number 3 in front of CJ Stroud at 4. There we go. Here's the top 4. Young at 1, Rattler at, no, I'm sorry, Caleb Williams at 2. Of course, they can't present a list. There's just paragraphs with names all over the place. Caleb Williams at 2. Then we've got Rattler at 3 and CJ Stroud at 4. That's according to Pro Football Focus, with Dylan Gabriel at 8.
Yeah, I saw something the other day that I didn't see that one. I heard top 10, but I know that he is ranked as a number 1, and I don't remember what publication this was or what media outlet provided this, but the number 1 quarterback in terms of the Big 12 conference coming back. So yeah, I think, like I said, normally you would be feel a little bit nervous about losing basically 98, 99% of your of your passing offense from a quarterback perspective, from the year before. But I think there's a lot of confidence in what Dylan Gabriel could bring to the table for Oklahoma, just in terms of production down the field, production of knowledge of the offense. Is not a big dual threat guy, but is at least a little bit of a threat with his legs as well. Ran for a couple 100 yards last year, even in a short amount of time. So he was, understanding that offense had kind of moved a little bit with Gus Malzahn, more of kind of a probably more running game from the quarterback there. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works and how he's able to integrate himself into not only the new offense, but into the program, and with the receivers that Oklahoma has there.
Joey Foster with some breaking news. West Virginia is taking down OU this year in Morgantown. I don't think that's happened since West Virginia's joined the Big 12. I think they're a big offer against the Sooners. David, Brent Venables would play the opposition's quarterback against his defense. While doing this, he would be called Mr. Green Jeans. Okay.
Never heard that. And then Mark, I mean, I think when you look, it's probably more of a interesting conversation to look at, what the hierarchy of the rest of the quarterback room, maybe looks like. You've got Nick Evers, who is the guy who's the first real. I mean, obviously, is the first one was bringing in Dylan Gabriel, but the first recruit was Nick Evers, number 8 overall quarterback out of Flower Mound, Texas. Dual threat guy for sure. Had 33 touchdowns a year ago, 19 through the air, 14 on the ground, a little over 600 yards running the ball. We had, I think, a couple of weeks ago we talked about when his dad had kind of went on Twitter, or brother, whoever it was, family member, had went on Twitter and talked about how much weight he's already gained just early on in the process. So I think this will be a big year for him, just really kind of fitting into his body, understanding the offense a little bit more, and then really just learning a lot this next year. And then you've got Ralph Rucker, who was a preferred walk on. He actually was the number 3 guy for Oklahoma this past year. And then you've got Micah Bowens, who was the Penn State transfer, and had moved on from Penn State to Oklahoma. So I think that's probably the biggest Mark, the biggest, obviously not concern, but just discussion point, I guess, in terms of hierarchy is, who ends up getting that backup role. Is it Evers, or if it's not Evers, what that looks like, because as you would, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Oklahoma has zero. Zero experience, at the quarterback position coming into this year in terms of who's been able to play. So, you're always one injury away from the backup playing. So I think it'll be really, really important to get those guys up to speed, and interesting to see who gets that backup role.
All right. Matt's in the chat asking about possibilities on who might commit next. We did talk about the 2022 class, and of course, Labias and his decision that's upcoming. Any thoughts, any rumors, any indications of what could be the next big news in the 2023 class?
Yeah, I've not heard. There's some stuff going on about a kid named David Stone had moved over. I think that's a kid that you might look at for Oklahoma. Oklahoma just recently got, not too long, and I say recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, receiver Ashton Cozart had committed to Oklahoma. He's a 4-star guy. Number 23 ranked receiver in the country. Again, he's from Flower Mound, Texas, the same high school that Nick Evers came from as well. So, we've talked about the 2023 kids. They can change their mind so many times. So it's interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes through. But yeah, that I've not really heard any more, but recently on any 2023. In terms of a guy that's really, really close to committing at this point.
Sometimes I see these questions and I don't know where we're delving into at this point. So Jason, of course, you just let me know if you have no idea what is being referred to here. But Matt comes back with, what's your take on Hazelwood BS?
So Jaden Hazelwood, a day or two ago, had kind of threw out a tweet about Oklahoma fans kind of complaining about his toughness and his ability to and kind of come back from the injury and just the year that he had. And so I don't know, this Hazelwood's he's a kid that has not been shy about kind of getting on Twitter and getting on the social media and throwing some things out there. But I don't think, from my point of view, Mark, there was not I don't know that there was really any question about his toughness. Was any question about his ability to go out there and make the play? Yeah, he was a little bit slower than, a step slower, which you would assume after a kid goes through an ACL injury, right? I mean, it's hard to be at the same level that he was, but I think he's going to do a good job at Arkansas. So, and I don't know, I don't understand completely what the reasoning is. He's moved on. He's been in Arkansas for a while now. I would think that he was, really focused on moving forward. But I kind of heard some rumors and some talk that he had a little bit of buyer's remorse early on, just in terms of going to, pulling that trigger to going to Arkansas a little bit quicker than maybe he would have liked, or if he had it to do over again. But no, I think it'll be a good situation for both schools, Oklahoma moving forward, and then Jaden Hazelwood, moving on there at Arkansas.
Yeah, I say this fully knowing that I'm engaged on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram to a lesser extent, and I'm out there like most of us on social media. So my little rant coming about the ills of social media go with the context that I'm on there as well. So I get it, but pretty much with what I've decided to do, I've got to be on there, and I certainly know that social media can be used for good. I enjoy seeing Jason's post with his basketball team and all the great success that they've had recently. Jason and I being Facebook friends, and love seeing those posts, and there's a lot of good that can come from social media. But when I hear things like a player that has to defend himself and gets into an exchange with fans about his discipline and his toughness, and fans criticizing online about players, and I just think, my goodness, we would all be so much better off if we just didn't have that platform to criticize and defame people and all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah, well, it's the time, right, Mark? I mean, this is, especially when you think about football, you've college football game. You've got that. There's two big lulls that we have a little bit, where there's not as much to talk about. That the lull in between when spring practice or the spring game happens from kind of the bowl season or the end of the recruiting cycle, and then you've got obviously the end of spring ball until you get to summer. So this is the first kind of area where there's a little bit more talking going on than more action. So you see some of these things from time to time, and it's just, it happens. But I think, and that's why I said I don't completely understand the reason why going back and calling fans out or anything like that. But it's part of the game with these kids now. Social media is a big part of it.
Folks, we're here talking Oklahoma football with each one of you every Wednesday. And again, just be cognizant that we're working out some details about some future scheduling. So we will get that information to you soon regarding where our landing spot is going to be each and every week. But we've done this 46 consecutive weeks, and this would not be possible without Jason's efforts and his knowledge and insight into Oklahoma football. So we hope everybody appreciates that. We would, of course, love for this show, this channel, the entire package to blow up. And we thank everyone for the success that we've received thus far, as this show gains in views, both live and recorded views each and every week. So we thank you for all of that. We've got about 100 people on the line. So keep in mind that you reach people out there through social media and just personal contact that love college football, and OU in particular, that have no idea that we are here talking Sooners each and every week. So please let those people know that we're here. And we've got an Oklahoma Voice of College Football channel. So let those people know, and we would love to build our audience. And of course, as I've got on the banner right there, we would love to have a sponsor for this show, for this channel. And so please keep that in mind. And if you have any possible prospects out there, direct them toward me at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. And we would love to keep this going for another 46 weeks and way beyond that, and appreciates Jason's efforts, not just to be here each and every week, but he's done several live shows when there's been breaking news. He's hosted our post-game show for Oklahoma football each and every week last season. And so Jason has been the guy for sure. All right. I saw another rankings come out the other day that involved all-time. We addressed AP rankings a few weeks ago, and then another one came out later, which is the coaches poll, which has been out since 1950. And again, Oklahoma ranked number one, tied with Ohio State. So Sooner fans feel good when it comes to rankings all time, both since the AP started in 1936 and the coaches poll in 1950, tied with Ohio State. In the coaches poll, by whatever metrics, they give a point system to how many times you were number one, how many times in the top 10, and your various rankings throughout the weeks and at the conclusion of the season, and came up with a metric that has OU at number one. I know there's some thought out there that, well, let me get your take on this, Jason. Of course, it came out over the weekend that even though there was so much momentum and goodwill initially with this college football playoff expansion that was announced going back to last summer, the plan seemed to be pretty well received across the board. You know, any plan that comes out, there are going to be critics and detractors, but considering people's inclination for the most part to pick at anybody's format or plan, the proposal seemed to gain a lot of public satisfaction and acclaim, but it's fallen apart based on a number of issues that I find very on the surface to be minuscule. And I think it's more of a power play behind the scenes of conferences trying to deter the SEC's dominance in more of a power struggle than an actual concern over the stipulations of the system. But for right now, we will have no expansion to the college football playoff until at least 2026.
It's disappointing, Mark. I mean, I think I wasn't surprised completely to see it happen based on the way some of the meetings were going, and there was pushback from the ACC of all leagues was a little bit interesting as well. And then I knew the possibility was here when some of the seemed like we were close. Then seems like we were close, and then all of the um, change within conference alignment happened with obviously Oklahoma and Texas like spearheading that, and then some of the other changes that came across. I know that there was some leaders that were a little bit apprehensive about moving forward with a with a playoff structure. But no, and I agree with you. There's some power play going on the um, on the back end, probably from the SEC, because SEC's come out numerous times and said we're fine with four, and we're fine with four because it's benefited them so much. But when you think about it, I don't necessarily completely understand why that's the message from the SEC, that yes, you're fine with four, but at the end of the day, you get 12 in there. As strong as the SEC has been, I mean, you have to think that you're getting almost each and every year, if it was a 12 team model, that you're getting three or four almost every season. Obviously, depending on how the structure of the 12 are selected, but yeah, it's strange. I mean, I think it's still inevitable, right? I mean, but it's still going to take a little bit of time, maybe for some of that realignment to settle, and if there's some not existing, but some additional realignment that occurs on top of this in the near future. But maybe the SEC wanted to get a little bit of a better feel on what the new structure within their conference would look like with Oklahoma and Texas, just in terms of what does that conference championship look like? What does the and maybe the hesitancy, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Mark, some of the things that I had heard of potentially having a almost like a semifinal and a final, um, SEC championship. Maybe that's more beneficial from a money perspective. Maybe that's, and they don't want these teams to have to play, 16, 17 games in a season. But yeah, no, it's at the end of the day, really, for me, disappointing. I think, just the opportunity to have more teams in is a value add for the sport, a value add for the playoffs in itself. I'm not saying that our Final Four is not going to be as, because the point spreads have continue to be pretty lopsided. But at the end of the day, you're going to have much better games in those those quarterfinal games as are even the first round games that we've seen. And you put teams that are really hot towards the end of the season and giving them a chance where they've lost a couple of games. I mean, Utah is a prime example. Yeah, I know that they lost to Ohio State, but still they were a very hot team towards the end of the year, and what's to say that they won't continue to catch fire and make some noise in that playoff? So yeah, it's unfortunately it's something that we're going to have to wait a few years for now.
It's easy to see why the SEC is comfortable with the 4-team playoff. Not that they're not going to or block an expansion to 8 or 12, because they would benefit from that as well. I think the Big Ten and the SEC would benefit, and the Big Ten has had a lot of teams. They've got that tier of teams that consistently drop below the 4 that make it, where you would think, if you look at recent history, the Big Ten would benefit greatly from an expansion to 8 or 12, especially. But the SEC, and so in the 8 years, I just counted it up. In the 8 years of a playoff, the SEC has entered 10 teams into the playoff. So they haven't missed the playoff, and twice they've had 2 teams in. So 10 for the SEC. The ACC and the Big Ten are next with 6. It's pretty decided. I know it's only 8 years and only 10 versus 6, but if you extrapolate that out and that trend continues, that's a pretty reasonable decided gap between the SEC always getting a spot, and sometimes now 2 out of 8 years getting 2 spots, and the SEC, the Big Ten and the ACC missing some years. So they're at 6, the ACC and the Big Ten. Then the Big 12's at 4, of course, with Oklahoma, and then the Pac-12 with 2. So it's a pretty good spread for the SEC right now with the 14 playoff, and you can credit the SEC partially for that. In my thinking, you give them about half credit for winning their non-conference games and placing a team in position each year, and sometimes 2 teams, 2017 and this past season, in position to be selected because they've performed outside the conference. But I also think that there's, based on their previous dominance, preference given to the SEC. So I think some of that they've earned, and I think they've earned it in the past, and therefore that gives them the preferential treatment from year to year.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. You're spot on with that, Mark. And it's just, and I don't know what it would take. I don't know what it will take, I guess I should say, to change the mind of some of those teams. To your point, that's had some of that preferential treatment. It's interesting with when you look at when you look at people that are the consumers of college football. Do people enjoy seeing the same teams over and over compete, or would they like to see some different teams, get in there, get the opportunity to be able to do this? And I mean, from my perspective, I think that the opposition that I've continued to hear, I've always heard is, oh, the Final Four games aren't competitive as it is. Why would we want to bring more teams into it. And I think for me the difference is on the other side of it, right? You'll yes, you may still have some of those non-competitive games in the in the final four, the plus one situation, but then you have much more competitive games early on, and specifically if you integrate some of these bowls into the situation where maybe there's not as much intrigue as there has in the past, then I think it's a win-win. I mean, the one concern I get some of these coaches and athletic directors, administrators don't want these kids playing 16, 17 games. I get that. That's a concern, and I completely understand. And I guess this is just me thinking optimistically that maybe the feeling is the delay is we need to restructure some of these schedules a little bit in such a way that we're not playing so many regular season games to allow them to play um, 16, 17 games. But I mean, but Mark, when you look at these some of these kids that are going to go play at the next level, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're playing. There's 17 regular season games now, right? Then you have the playoffs that could go. You could potentially play another 3 or 4 games. So some of these, when you get a little bit older, when you're in the NFL, you're playing could be potentially playing 20 games or more. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope we get to a point here by 2026 where there's a lot less opposition, and then we start gaining some traction on this.
Absolutely. So we've had 268 people view the video thus far. We've got 29 likes. So please like the video. Appreciate everyone who encourages others to like the video. It's very simple to do. Click, like the video, and that helps the YouTube algorithm. So again, we've got about 300 people that have come through the live stream. So it's even worse than a lot of people will look at how many people are currently watching and say, like, we've got 95 people watching. We only have 29 likes. So it's even more so than that. We've had almost 300 people come through the video and only 29 likes. So we appreciate you hitting the like button. Dennis says the Big Ten is against an 8-team playoff, 6+2, because it believes the 2 at-large spots would almost always go to the SEC teams or to a Notre Dame and an SEC team, especially after Oklahoma and Texas join.
And Mark, for me, uh, this may be a bad way to say it, but I'm just going. This is the way I feel. Get better. If you don't, if you feel like this, if you feel like these at large team or at large situations are going to go to Oklahoma or Texas or Notre Dame or whoever you want to say, just get better. At the end of the day.
Absolutely. Although the selection is made by people. So if the selection was objective,
Yeah.
I would completely agree with that. Let's see. There's someone here. David. David says here, could you interview OU football alumni that have came back to work with the program? So basically, David and anyone else, if you would like to see guests, whether it be on this particular show or just on the Oklahoma channel, in particular, and whether that's former players or recruits or media guests, just send me an email at MarkRogersTV@gmail. Don't leave it here because I'm going to lose this this live chat. But just hit me up at MarkRogersTV@gmail if there are any suggestions you have and people you would like to see featured here, whether those are, again, former coaches, players, or media people. All right. We see Mr. Westmus make a comment that seems to encapsulate Oklahoma fans, Sooner Nation as a whole, after the initial shock of the Lincoln Riley departure. this fan base, at least based on the feedback that we get, which is quite a bit here from week to week and throughout all the video comments that we receive every day, the fan base seems to be pretty galvanized and excited about the Brent Venables tenure.
They really are, Mark. I think, I think to a certain degree, what Lincoln Riley did, he woke up a little bit of of a sleeping giant. I think, we've talked about the monster that is the Oklahoma football program, and the fact that Oklahoma hasn't won a national championship since the year 2000, and that monster, is something that really needs to be fed. But I think what had happened, and we talked about this, with a little bit of the downward trajectory that had been happening with Oklahoma program over the last 3 years, and to get a guy who is such a team guy, such a relationship guy, had been part of this program, had been part of the obviously the 2000 national championship team. What he's doing just in an early period, and bringing back a lot of the former players that are part of the coaching staff. They've brought back a lot of former players that are part of this soul program that Brent Venables has instituted early on. He's hit all of the right buttons. Oklahoma, the official Oklahoma Twitter page has some, because Oklahoma started a little bit of spring practice, and they've got some, they've got some clips that they show, and you see, you you see Venables just up in their face yelling and screaming, and it's a different mentality that Oklahoma has had. You hardly would ever see Riley in a situation where he was screaming at them in a positive way, right? So I think that renewed toughness, I think that renewed vigor that has brought a lot of excitement for Oklahoma, and I think specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's been so many years that Oklahoma fans watching this team just get sick and tired of watching a defense not perform over and over again. There's been a couple of years where it's been a little bit better. Um, you know, year before, Oklahoma was in the top 30 defensive overall, and you thought they were making a little bit of a run, and then this past year was a little bit of a step down, certainly to where they are. But you've got to think, and love listening to your interview with Parker a couple weeks ago, and you know I agree with him. I can't imagine a situation where, with all of the talent that Oklahoma still has brought in on the defensive side of the ball, all the talent from a coaching perspective, Brent Venables' track record of being, if not the best, one of the best recruiters, motivators, defensive coordinators, coaches in all of college football, getting Oklahoma back to a top 30 team defensively. It's hard to imagine that not happening. Yeah, they could struggle a little bit early, just kind of understanding the scheme, understanding exactly what Brent Venables and Todd Bates and Roof and Jay Valai and all these guys want out of their defense. But I think you'll see a much different team, a much more sound team, a much more disciplined team, a much um, a much better team playing together as a team overall this year. And I think I've remarked to a couple of people, this might be the most excitement that there's been specifically for a spring game, right? Because you have pretty much a brand new coaching staff, obviously almost completely new on the defensive side of the ball. And then you've got a new quarterback coming in that people are going to want to see. You've got a new offensive system that people are going to want to see. Obviously, the intrigue with Brent Venables coming over is something that you're going to want to see. A new defensive, obviously staff, but a new defensive system as well, that you're going to want to see. So I think there's more intrigue, specifically starting with this spring game, than there has been in quite some time. So I think that's generated a ton of excitement, and I think And I think Mark, I think at least from my perspective, I think you look at where I think a lot of people thought Oklahoma might be this year after everything that happened with Riley and then entering in Venables. I think a lot of people thought, okay, we'll take a little bit of a step back in terms of what Oklahoma's productivity could be this year. I think a lot of people at that point thought, okay, we've lost all of these recruits. Not sure exactly what's going to happen in terms of the staff hirings and things like that. But you've got maybe a potentially an 8-4, 9-3 step back season a little bit. But then when you look at how Venables was able to completely rectify the recruiting cycle. I know that listening to and we'd mentioned this. Oklahoma at one point was at number 21, and to get from number 21 to 8 in such a short time was remarkable. When you talk about all the transfer portal guys that they were able to bring in to really solidify some areas of weakness that this team has had is I think big. And I couldn't agree more with Parker. The concern, I don't have as much concern probably on the running back side that maybe he did. I think Oklahoma will whether it be a couple of freshmen getting into the mix, whether it be Eric Gray, whether it be Marcus Major, what that is. I do think the biggest concern probably is the offensive line still, just to see how much better those kids can get in one season. I think the addition of the Cal transfer will be big among the offensive line, and then you've got some guys that have been here a while that's just not really been able to put it all together. And are they able to do that? Staff's not a whole lot different. Obviously, that you still got Beadenbow as the offensive line coach, but how much of a difference does the offseason strength and conditioning come in? How big of a difference is to get those guys at a level that you would expect them to be? So yeah, there's tons of excitement coming into the season where you look, Mark, that maybe this team is not necessarily um, the same trajectory that we talked about at this point last year, just in terms of this being a team that really absolutely should make the college football playoff, has a really, really big chance to win a national championship. Whereas now you've got a team that I think a lot of people think this team can still challenge Baylor. They can still challenge with Texas, and who knows what Oklahoma State will have for a conference championship. And if you win a conference championship in the Big 12, particularly if you only go into that game with a single loss, then you've put yourself in a position to possibly get back to that college football playoff.
Join our Discord and talk Sooners all the time. We just fired up this Discord on Tuesday. We've already got a pretty good collection of people in there talking college football. So we've got a channel representing every major conference, and we will create new channels based on demand. But just go to Patreon, search Mark Rogers TV, and sign up right there. And you can join our Discord and talk Sooners, college football, whatever your team, whatever your conference, all the time, anytime, and I'll be in there on a regular basis as well. Jay Jones is saying that Eric Gray needs to be slotted out and motioned out more. Doesn't run well between the tackles.
Yeah, no, so I agree with the first part. I think what you'll see a little bit more, Jay and Mark, out of Jeff Levy's system is you'll see him slotted out a little bit more, and think you'll see him go in motion and get some more of those jet sweeps to get him outside a little bit more. I don't know that he's a really bad between the tackles runner, because he did that well at Tennessee. But I think there was some situations where he wasn't quite as good as Kenny Brooks, and he's not going to be as good as he's probably not going to be as good as Marcus Major running between the tackles. He's probably not even going to be as good as maybe a Javante Barnes coming in running between the tackles. But I think it's going to be big for Oklahoma and Levy to find ways to get this kid out in the open, because that's where he he's the best. He's, like I said, he's not quite as good between the tackles, and I think you'll see a situation, Mark, here where Levy will do a lot of things to get his players in space and let them do what they can do best.
We have a record scheduled with Parker Thune from 247 Sports here in the next few days, so be looking out for those segments. And again, as Jason and I discussed off the top, we will probably have to adjust our show time, so just be aware of that, and we will get back to you soon with what we attempt to be a new slot for the OU show here live each and every week. And of course, we'll tackle a new position headed towards spring practice next week. Do we want to decide what that is? Jason, do you have a position you'd like to tackle next?
No, we can go to the offensive line since we started with the quarterback here. Offensive line, probably like I mentioned earlier, probably the area that there's more talk about, more concern about, and things like that. So, I think that's good. That's a good next step.
Next week, folks, we're going to break down the offensive line. So join us then. And for those of you just joining us now and have not been with us for the entire hour, keep in mind that we tackled a number of the topics, including the quarterback room and the recent or upcoming decision by Labias and Mackay Overton. That's coming up. Address the 23 recruiting class and a number of other things. So please, again, wait for the video to post and jump on there and check out the entire show. All right. Yes. Offensive line next week. And we will jump on that. And again, we're still awaiting a exact date for when spring practice is going to start.
Yeah, we've had spring practice has started a little bit. Just the final date on when the spring game will start. I've heard potentially April 16th. I don't know that hasn't necessarily been completely confirmed. Officially through Oklahoma, but I think that's what I've heard at this point.
All right. Good stuff. Well, again, we appreciate everybody being here. Please wait for the video to post and catch up with what you missed here for the last hour on OU Sooners Live. We will let you know our next show and our projected new time slot and day coming up. So just keep it locked in here at the Voice of College Football. Subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Appreciate everyone being here. Jason, as always, you make this go. Actually, Bishop PFDR Newkirk is telling us April 23rd at 2 o'clock is the time. I just did a Google search, and I see one site that would be SI is also saying April 23rd at 2 Central. So that must be it right there. All right, Jason, we appreciate it as always, and we will be back here next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Keep in mind, if you enjoy the college football talk, we've got Michigan at 5, Florida State at 6, and Miami at 7. See you then.